Nael had always been fascinated by movement. From the way a leaf spiraled in the wind to the rhythmic flow of the river that cut through the valley near his home, he found patterns everywhere. As a child, he tried to mimic the dance of the birds, hopping from rocks to tree stumps, feeling the thrill of balance and coordination. But each attempt ended in a stumble, a scrape, or a fall. Most people would have grown frustrated, but not Nael. In his quiet, unassuming way, he took every failure as a lesson. He would sit on a rock, examine what went wrong, and imagine what he could do differently next time. He wasn't in any hurry to be perfect, he only wanted to understand the rhythm of life itself. By the time he was a teenager, Nael had turned his fascination into obsession. While other kids were chasing after games, social media, or fleeting distractions, he had discovered parkour. The world of movement spoke to him in ways words could not. Each alley, staircase, and ledge became a canvas for his creativity. He had no mentors, no guides, and no structured training. All he had was his determination and the countless hours he spent analyzing his surroundings. When he first tried to leap from a low wall to the next, he misjudged the distance and fell flat on his back. Pain shot through his ribs, but instead of quitting, he laughed quietly at himself. "Not quite," he murmured, dusting off the dirt. And then, he tried again. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Nael's small neighborhood became his laboratory. He began with jumps, climbs, and rolls that seemed impossible, gradually making them possible through repetition and patient observation. Sometimes, he would sit atop a roof at sunset, watching the shadows lengthen over the streets, feeling the warmth of accomplishment spread through him. He realized that mastery wasn't about dazzling others, it was about outlasting his own doubts. The bruises, the cuts, and the scraped knees were all badges of progress. One evening, a group of older kids from the city came through his neighborhood. They were confident, laughing loudly, moving with an agility that seemed effortless. Nael watched from the shadows, feeling a pang of envy and a spark of challenge. When one of them invited him to try a jump over a narrow alleyway, his heart pounded. He studied the distance, the positioning of the walls, and the landing spot. The first attempt ended in a stumble, the second in a near miss. On the third, he propelled himself forward, muscles straining, heart racing, and landed with perfect balance. The others paused, impressed. Nael didn't smile, he only felt a quiet satisfaction. The triumph wasn't for their approval, it was for his persistence. From that day, Nael became known in his neighborhood for his agility and fearless spirit. People began calling him the Sparrow, because of the lightness of his movements and the way he seemed to glide over obstacles. But Nael wasn't interested in titles or recognition. He wanted to explore limits, both physical and mental. He experimented with techniques he invented himself, combining jumps, spins, and intricate rolls. Every failure pushed him to refine his approach, to observe his body's mechanics more carefully, and to find a rhythm that was uniquely his. As he grew older, Nael's passion deepened into artistry. He started documenting his routines in a small notebook, sketching sequences, noting which movements flowed into each other naturally. He watched videos of athletes and dancers from around the world, not to copy them, but to understand the language of motion. Gradually, he created sequences so fluid they seemed like magic. People would stop and watch him for hours as he moved through alleys, fences, and rooftops, weaving an invisible thread of rhythm that connected every step. Nael had become a master in the eyes of others, but he still considered himself a beginner every time he learned a new technique. The turning point in his journey came unexpectedly. One morning, while exploring an abandoned factory near the edge of town, he discovered a series of rusted scaffolds and catwalks. They looked impossible to navigate, and most people would have turned away. But Nael felt a familiar thrill. He spent days studying the structure, noting its weaknesses, and testing small jumps and climbs. Each fall was a lesson. Each bruise a reminder of his commitment. Slowly, he began to move through the factory with grace and precision, as though the space itself had been built for him. His movements told a story of perseverance, of refusing to quit even when the path seemed insurmountable. Word of Nael's skill eventually reached beyond his neighborhood. He was invited to showcase his abilities in small exhibitions, where people marveled at his control and creativity. Yet, every performance began with a private struggle. Before each jump, each landing, he confronted the same internal voice that had haunted him as a child: what if you fail? But he had learned to listen without yielding. He acknowledged the fear, measured it, and then let it fuel him forward. That voice became a companion rather than an enemy, a reminder that mastery was born not from avoiding failure but from embracing it. Nael's journey wasn't only physical, it was deeply mental and emotional. Each scrape and stumble taught him patience, each successful landing taught him humility. He discovered that mastery was not about achieving perfection, but about the courage to persist, to keep pushing forward when the world offered no guarantees. In moments of solitude, perched atop a high rooftop, he would watch the city stretch out before him and reflect on how far he had come. The once timid boy who had feared failure was now someone who understood that struggle was the canvas upon which greatness was painted. As years passed, Nael continued to innovate. He began blending parkour with elements of acrobatics, martial arts, and dance, creating sequences that seemed almost unreal. People who witnessed his performances described them as poetry in motion. Yet, Nael never lost the humility that had driven him from the start. Every movement, every leap, reminded him that he was still learning. There was always a new wall to climb, a higher jump to attempt, a more complex routine to master. The journey never ended, and that was exactly what made it beautiful. Through it all, Nael became more than a performer, he became a symbol of relentless determination. Young kids from his neighborhood started emulating his movements, not to become him, but to discover their own courage. Nael would watch them from a distance, quietly encouraging, never imposing, always reminding himself that the true reward was in the effort, not the applause. He understood that every master, including himself, had been a beginner who refused to quit. And he realized that the essence of mastery lay not in a final destination, but in the daily, sometimes painful, commitment to try again. In his late 20s, Nael faced his greatest challenge. A massive storm had damaged the city, flooding streets and washing away familiar paths. His usual practice grounds were gone. The walls he had climbed for years had crumbled. Most people would have given up, lamenting the loss. Nael, however, saw an opportunity. The chaos of the storm left behind new obstacles, unfamiliar terrains, and unpredictable spaces. He approached each one as he had done as a child, with curiosity, caution, and courage. The community watched in awe as Nael transformed the ruined cityscape into a playground of movement, turning devastation into art. The lesson was clear: mastery wasn't about comfort or safety, it was about adaptation, resilience, and relentless effort. By the time Nael reached his 30s, he had become a legend. People would tell stories of the sparrow who could leap impossibly, twist gracefully, and defy fear itself. But Nael remained grounded, constantly experimenting, falling, and rising again. He knew that true mastery was not a title to hold but a mindset to cultivate. Every day presented a new challenge, a new sequence, a new way to understand the rhythm of life. And every day, he moved forward, reminding himself and everyone who watched that greatness is earned by those who refuse to quit, no matter how many times they fall. In quiet moments, when the applause faded and the streets were empty, Nael would still find himself on a low wall or a narrow ledge, testing a new jump, a new spin. He smiled softly at his reflection in a puddle, seeing the countless scratches, scars, and bruises that marked his journey. They were not imperfections, they were proof of persistence, evidence of a life spent embracing the struggle, transforming failure into strength, and learning to fly without fear. Nael never stopped moving. And in that perpetual motion, he discovered the profound truth behind every story of mastery, that no one is born an expert, that courage grows from persistence, and that every master, regardless of their fame or skill, was once a beginner who refused to quit.